Yeah, real sounds of Africa to once again kick off our World Football phone-in. This morning we are talking football in South America with the Legendino, Tim Vickery. Tim, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. You know, I've been looking forward to this for days and days. In fact, I've been looking forward to it ever since Tuesday night. What an apt little promo we just heard there. Lewis and the art of qualifying. Now, that's particularly appropriate given what happened on Tuesday night. And, you know, Johnny Arnold, he always comes across as so calm and so composed. But tonight, we're gonna find out how much is in Johnny Arnold. You know, we're going to find out if we're going to get a kind of Taylor Twellman-style rant out of him. We're going to find out just how much of a sweat Johnny Arnold works up. So I can't wait for what's going to happen over the next 2 hours.
Okay, because I don't have a clue what you're talking about. And here's the coup. Let's hope we're going to get Johnny Arnold, because at the moment we haven't got him. And
oh, no.
Yeah, you see, you built it all up. You've been waiting a week for what? For absolutely nothing. Why don't you let me do the introductions in future? Why don't you let me do the preamble so that you know what's going on?
Well,
you see,
right,
you try and take my job, you see what happens when you try to take my job. Oh,
it still works because it's an anti-climax almost as big as the World Cup qualification campaign of the United States of America. So it kind of works that way, you know, because you build it up, and then suddenly it all goes flat.
And, okay, should we start talking about Messi? Everybody wants to know, Messi, how good is this kid? He saved his entire country from humiliation.
Yeah, where did you all hear about him first?
On the World Football phone.
Right here, wouldn't it?
Yes, indeed.
Right here.
You're absolutely right.
Right here. I discovered him and I'm still waiting for my 10%.
And how many years ago was that? How many years ago was that you told us of his pigeon feet?
February of 2005. South American Under-20 Championships. Argentina have called him up really because they'd heard that there might be something special there and they knew that Spain were after him. So they wanted to get him. And just see if there's anything special there. And they didn't give him the number 10 shirt. And he'd only played one friendly for Barcelona at this stage. So no one really knew anything about him. And he was only 17 with eyes that would glow. The others were 19 and in the tournament. So, you know, he's small anyway, but he was even smaller then. And I remember it as if it were yesterday, because when
I were a lad,
yeah, that's right. Because when he took the field, this can't be serious. And look at him. I don't know if you remember the kind of floppy hairstyle he had at the time. He just looked like a 10-year-old. No, this can't be it. He's half as high as anyone else. You know, tell me, he just looks sloppy. It can't be. And then as soon as that ball was tied to that left foot, we all knew we were in the presence of something very, very special. And he keeps turning it on. And I was amazed the day before he saved Argentina. I was amazed on social media to see the depth of dislike that there is for him. You know, people saying, oh, he's never done it for Argentina, he's never done it in a World Cup. Well, hang on a minute. He scored more goals for Argentina than anyone else ever in history. And the last World Cup, all right, he didn't quite win it, but, you know, he took him a long way, and it was really him. And since the World Cup, it's been more him than it was then. You know, the dependence on him is absolutely terrifying. And I was saying last week, you know, with Mina was asking, I was thinking, well, you know, against Ecuador, finally he's going to get some space. And he had some space. And also he had something else which has been badly lacking in the last in recent games. He had someone to combine with. Which was Di Maria. The position of Di Maria was changed, so Di Maria was part of an attacking trident, him and Messi behind the centre forward. And it was Di Maria and Messi who together undressed an admittedly not very strong Ecuador defence. But the great players, they usually come out when you really, really need them, and how Argentina needed them. And, you know, even if you don't like aspects of him, it's hard to see what there is to dislike. He's such a neutral character. But, you know, we ain't going to have him for much longer. He's 30 now. You know, in terms of international football, I'm not sure if he's going to carry on beyond the World Cup. It's a lot of sacrifices that he makes. So for crying out loud, let's sit back and enjoy it while we've got it, because we ain't going to see his like again for a while.
Yeah, we'll come back to the sacrifice in a moment or two, but if you'd like to join in the conversation this morning for our World Football phone-in, and give us a call, 08085 909 693. 08085 909 693. You can text us on 85058, email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. Tim's talking South American football. And incidentally, Tim, a lot of people ain't going to get no supper tonight, you know. A lot of people are going to have to suffer tonight.
Is it Armageddon time already?
No, not Armageddon time. I was thinking more gloating time because Jon Arnold is here. Hello, John.
Well, hello.
Hello. Yeah. Do you want to do that intro again? Will you, Tim? Do you want to do the intro again?
No,
Let's rewind.
He's just done
rewind
it for us.
Yeah.
He was so defensive with that. Oh, hello. He was so kind of what's coming here.
He knows what's coming, doesn't he? He does what's coming. Go on, tell him what's coming anyway. Go on, tell him what's coming. Remind us what's coming.
Well, let's wind him up. Okay. And see how hard he sweats. You know, see if he really works up a sweat. So, well, let's see if there's a rant in him. You know, because he's usually so controlled.
He is
you know,
normally.
So such a nice guy. Let's see if there's a. Let's see if you put a stick of dynamite up his backside, what happens? And I think Tuesday night has put a stick of dynamite.
Let's see if he's going to get
right
any
where the
supper
sun
tonight.
shine.
Yeah, see if he's going to get any supper tonight. John, welcome to the program.
Well, listen, I was just going to say. I heard you say we need to sit back and enjoy Messi, and unfortunately, I'll have nothing better to do this summer, Tim. I'll cover Mexico. I love watching El3. I'll cover Costa Rica, the Ticos.
What happened to the USA?
Story. They didn't make the World Cup.
Oh,
they
really?
They didn't make the World Cup, and
they qualify. You mean they didn't qualify?
They didn't qualify for the final. I'm sure we'll get questions on it. I'm sure we'll get into it, but I'll tell you now. I mean, it puts you at a loss. I mean, it's the first time in my lifetime. This will be the first World Cup ever in my life and my generation, which has grown up with the sport. The first one to do so in the United States. It's the first time in our lifetime that we haven't seen the United States qualified, and it's absolutely unacceptable. When you look at CONCACAF, no one loves the region more than me. I love the random questions. I'd be happy to talk about Panama, Honduras in the playoff, what have you. But with that said, the region was not strong this cycle. It was better last time around. It was probably better 8 years ago. And the U.S. simply couldn't get it done. It's unacceptable. It's shocking. And it has to start from the top. Unfortunately, today, we heard from Sunil Gulati, the president of U.S. Soccer, that he has no plans to resign. I'm not surprised. But I am a little... maybe disappointed isn't even the right word, but I think that for the United States, and like I said, I'm sure we'll take questions on this. I'm sure we'll get into it as we go along, but you have to start now from square one. Everything has to be on the table. For the men's soccer team not to qualify for the World Cup, it's unacceptable. You have to start. We have to turn over every stone. And we have to be open to every idea, and some of them we're going to reject, and some of them we're going to accept. But right now, it really is a moment for the U.S. where we have to take time to refocus, and unfortunately, we have nothing but time.
Greetings from California, says Aaron. I'm still quite upset over the U.S. failing to qualify for the 2018 World Cup. If the panel has any suggestions for who should be their next coach, it would be appreciated. I like David Wagner, the German-American coach of Huddersfield. Tim, who would you recommend for the United States first?
Well, no, I think that's one that's up to them. And that goes with two quick questions that I want to throw over to John. Number one, did anyone see this coming going into Tuesday night? And number two, what do you think are the urgent things that need to happen now for a quick fix?
First, no. Maybe, there might have been a few contrarian voices who said, look, Trinidad and Tobago. But the game against Panama was seen as the one that was going to be the decider. Panama has a good team and deservedly is going to the World Cup. I don't think many people thought that there was going to be a slip up in Trinidad, not least because the Soccer Warriors, with all love and respect to them, were the worst team in the Hex. And we're bringing a B team. Some of the better players were left with their clubs. Wow. Dennis Lawrence, the manager, I got to talk to him here in Mexico. I'm in Mexico right now. I got to talk to him here, and he was talking about, developing a group for the future and looking toward 2022 and bringing in players who he hasn't had a chance to see a lot of yet. So not only was it a Trinidad and Tobago team that was the worst team in the Hex, the final round of CONCACAF qualification, it wasn't even their best group. But, and the U.S. only needed a draw. And so to go out and do that, no, I don't think anyone saw it coming. The most urgent things, number one, is already taken care of. Bruce Arena, his job was simply to qualify the U.S. for the World Cup and show well in that tournament. Obviously, he failed to do that job. And while I think history will probably be kind to his legacy as both an MLS coach and even a national team coach because of the work he did the first time around, he failed in the objective and resigned. Now, I think we do need to maybe not look at this as an urgent matter. I think one of the important things, and getting to the question as well, who should the coach be? I think the worst thing that the United States could do right now is run out and hire someone tomorrow. I think that you have a window now where I think what we're going to see happening, and what I hope we see happen, is an interim coach who takes the U.S. through the next several months. They're going to play friendlies in November. They're going to play friendlies next year. Who knows what they'll do, if anything, in the summer. But then after the World Cup, of course, we always see movement. We always see changes. And I think that's a good opportunity for the U.S. to maybe find a name who coaches at the World Cup. And either I think one of the candidates is Juan Carlos Osorio from Mexico. Any way the tournament goes for Mexico, I think he's going to be gone. He's a guy who knows the U.S. well, was educated in the U.S., has coached in MLS, but also has concerns about its relationship with the national team. At least that's my impression that he's given when he's talked about players like Giovanni Dos Santos, Carlos Vela going to MLS, Mexican players. So I think he would be a good guide. He speaks English, which is a thing that I'm not so convinced is a thing that needs to be part of the equation, but I think would certainly help acclimate to the U.S., obviously, would help the fans sort of enjoy him. I think he's a candidate. Wagner is a good shout. Again, I think that you need to use these months, 8, 9, 10 months, to look at all possibilities. Coaches that are coaching clubs right now, coaches that are coaching national teams right now, coaches who speak English, coaches who don't speak English, coaches who have a background, I think, of youth development is important. Because urgently, I think that we've seen that we need to reevaluate how we're bringing up players, how we're looking at players, how we're figuring out which players we need to spend time coaching up, which players need to be in certain programs. I think in part, there's a lot of reasons, and I think you can almost throw a dart and always hit near the bullseye when you're sort of dissecting this because, like I said, it's totally unacceptable. So I'm not sure that everything we're saying in the U.S. soccer community right now is totally valid, but I think that player development obviously is something where you have to say failed. Not qualifying for 2 Olympics, and those players would be in their prime right now. That's no good. And I think maybe we're seeing some of the ramifications of that, but we're also seeing the ramifications of a generation that didn't really have players who were able to break through at the top leagues of Europe. Christian Pulisic played well. He's, sort of the leading edge of the next generation. But when you look at 26, 27, 28, 29-year-old players who played in Europe, where were they? Nowhere to be found. And I think that's where the U.S. was really hurting. Who was the player in the prime that was supposed to lead this team? They were being led by a teenager and occasionally saved by a guy in his 30s in Clint Dempsey. That can't be, and I think we need to take steps now urgently, Tim, to get to your point, to make sure that doesn't happen again, to make sure that in 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, we're not looking at the prime, players in their prime and saying, where are these guys? I think those are the first steps that the U.S. needs to take is A, sit back, and define ourselves and figure out what we need in a coach, what kind of coach we need. Do we need a technical director and a coach? And really, what are we? I think, Tim, you've talked about the German rebuild. And, there have been some parallels drawn between what the U.S. kind of needs to do right now and what the German Federation went through after that disappointing Euro. And I think we do need to look at the very base questions of what are we? What are we doing? What is the American soccer system? What's the style? And again, I think we need time. So I would say nothing reactionary necessarily, although again, I would like to see things change at the top. But that, I guess, is my broad overview.
Stephen in Australia is with us. Stephen, what do you think?
About the Americans?
Yeah.
I think, quite frankly, this could be a little bit of a good shake-up for them in a sense that obviously they've been qualifying for World Cups pretty consistently for the last few decades and without really making huge amounts of progress beyond being a regular last 16 side. And my thinking would be this would really allow them to examine and knuckle down and have an introspective look at what it means to be an American soccer player would be my immediate answer.
Yeah, John?
I like it.
Yeah,
I like it. No, exactly. I mean, like I said, I think that identity is big, and it's something that we've lacked. When you ask the question, what characterizes the American soccer player, I don't know that there's ever been a good answer to that. And maybe we need to find a coach, a technical director, a federation president whatever position. We need to find leaders who can articulate that and then work toward that goal.
And Tim, again, you've often talked to, and stay with us, Stephen, please. You've often talked about culture and identity. If the United States lack that identity, the football identity, which is rooted in the cultural identity of the United States, if they lack it, how are they going to find it? Particularly a country that has, so many disparate people from all over the world coming together to play in its football team. You've got an element of Africans, an element of Latin Americans, an element of, European Americans and so on. How can they find that identity?
Well, I think this is perhaps from a base of ignorance, because I've spent a grand total of like 3 weeks in the United States in my life.
No,
but
I was
John
thinking generally,
and Sean before us have talked about pay for play. You got to shell out in order to get into the game. And maybe, in fact, not maybe, definitely one consequence of that is they're not building the most of their potential. They're not getting the most from the sections of society that maybe can't afford or don't want to be involved in pay to play. Without pay to play, perhaps there's a faster track to get Latinos through and developed, because it is striking there what John is telling us. The two major players from the US national team, Pulisic, a teenager who's developed in Europe, and Clint Dempsey, an absolute veteran. So, with major leagues now having more than 20 years, you'd expect that to be feeding through more quality players. Similar to where Stephen's calling from us from, Australia. And Australia have a playoff against Honduras, and we can get John's thoughts about who he thinks will get through that one. But Australia, I remember when they qualified for the World Cup in 2006, I think they expected, and I certainly expected, that over a decade later they would be much further down the line. Since then they've launched their own league, the A-League, which seems to be going reasonably well. They've moved to the Asian Confederation that gave them more competitive games, what they were looking for. But we still don't seem to be having a lot of progress from them. I wonder if there's similarities because these are two countries, perhaps two of the most successful countries in recent times in launching domestic leagues, but it doesn't seem to have filtered successfully enough through to the national team, and I just wonder why that would be. But in the case of the United States, I'm sure that that kind of pay-for-play culture at youth level has a detrimental effect on maximising your potential.
And just at the risk of this sounding like a requiem for the United States, let me bring one other person into the mix, representing Detroit City FC, Daniel in Detroit. What do you think?
Oh, I got tons to say about it. Absolutely tons to say about it. First of all, it's a pleasure to be on the show. I've been listening for a very long time, so thank you.
You're welcome.
For allowing me the privilege to talk to you guys. But my question's for Tim, and is basically with the upheaval that's going on with the Federation right now in the U.S., and a lot of people voicing their displeasure with the lack of player development and lack of actual structure. I was wondering what would be the best course of action for us going forward. The only country that's big enough with a structure that would mirror the United States is Brazil. And I was wondering how the Brazilian structure would fit within the United States, with our states having their own tournaments and own leagues, moving up into MLS or lower leagues from that, the second and third division, which are at this point kind of non-existent because they've been getting choked out by MLS. So it's kind of everything's going wrong for us right at the moment. But I was wondering what Tim had to say about that.
Certainly, I wouldn't want to copy Brazil. And Brazil do what they do, or the national team is doing what it's doing, despite the structure of domestic football and not because of it. I remember a few years ago when there was a financial crisis hit Europe hard. Everyone was expecting the Brazilian league to be in a different dimension. In fact, it's gone backwards. Despite the financial advantage their clubs have over clubs in the rest of the continent, they are underperforming. The structure of domestic football just simply doesn't work in Brazil, and that's not a place you want to look. An interesting place to look, I think, despite the huge disparity in population, is Uruguay. Because what Uruguay have done over recent years is really, really impressive. And it all has to do with a realisation. They've had the same coach now for more than 11 years, which helps because you get a long-term project there. But it all has to do with the realisation of the realities of globalisation. And Tabárez, the coach, when he took over 2006, his second spell in charge, the last job of his long career, very educated man, he said, globalisation is it's a game changer. It means that our domestic football is going to be weak because we can't compete. We can't hold on to our best players. And also, the players who are good enough for our domestic football are not good enough for global football, so they're not really good enough for our national team. So what we need to do is we need to identify at youth level, we need to identify as early as possible talented youngsters who have what it takes to succeed, not in domestic football, but in global football. And that means that they've got to have some speed about them. Speed of movement, or speed of technique, means you can make the ball move quickly, or speed of thought. Something that they have to have something like that enables them to thrive in global football. And then you develop them for years, especially you give them a crash course in the history and the identity of your football. Harder for the US because the US is still trying to forge an identity. Uruguay has it more than anyone else. And that stands you in good stead when they move abroad at a very early age, because you've done your hard work for them and you almost got them for life. But I think that project is so successful, and it's based around the performances at under 20 level. Under 17 is just for experience. Under 20 is when they want to see performance and they want to see results. And they keep renewing their national team. They're doing it again right now with players they feed in from that under 20 project. And the players who do well at under 20 level are usually good enough to slip straight in to the national team at senior level. So that is something that I think everyone should be looking at. How Uruguay identify those players. So in the case of the US, it would mean US soccer embarking on a program where you're breeding players not necessarily for MLS. You're breeding players who may be sold abroad, who may be good. Certainly, you want them to be good enough to be sold abroad. I don't know how that would go down in the political realities of the United States, grooming players who perhaps the MLS won't be their destiny. But that's what Uruguay has done, and that's how they keep punching above their weight.
And Stephen, in Australia, I suppose Australia has been through this kind of thing before, hasn't it? In itself, it's had some soul searching to do with regards to football. And I know you want to ask, really, which country's got the biggest problem for not qualifying this time around, Chile or the United States? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, to touch on Australia, just briefly, currently the Australian national side is experiencing a problem of the fact that really fantastic generation that got them to the World Cup in 2006 are now all gone, with the exception of Tim Cahill, who's apparently immortal and still can head the ball in. But the problem is that the national side has never moved on from relying on those brilliant players. It's essentially Aaron Moy is pretty much the outstanding player in his field. But the fact is, 10 years ago, Aaron Moy would have been one of 4 or 5 genuinely good quality top flight European players, and now they just don't have them. But the question I wanted to ask for, I suppose, both panelists was, obviously Chile and the USA have both failed to qualify. We've heard a lot about the USA already, about what they can do going forward, but I'm really curious to hear Tim's thoughts on what Chile can do. Obviously, they've had this fantastic generation, which have been to 5 consecutive years of international tournaments and reached finals and won championships and generally been fantastic. But now I think it's really a question of where do they go forward from here, because most of that fantastic generation are 30 and have maybe only got a couple of years left in them on the international stage. I'm curious as to what the Chilean approach is going to be now that they've failed to qualify for this World Cup. And also for Jon Arnold, as someone who lives in Australia, I'm curious to know what the Australian national team can expect when they take on Honduras next month, because obviously Honduras were at the last World Cup and went out losing all 3 games. I'm wondering, have they improved as a side since then?
We've got Daniel in Detroit with us. We've got Tim Vickery, the Legendino, who is in Rio, taking care of any questions you've got on South American football. We've got Jon Arnold, who's our Neymar, batting away any thoughts about the any digs from Tim about the US NA qualifying. In fact, it's been you did NA qualify conversation so far, but we haven't even mentioned Scotland yet. We haven't even mentioned Scotland.
We're doing it for the Americas. We've got to do or die.
So, Daniel, give us this rant.
The Yankees cannot do it.
Give us this rant. How do you feel about not NA qualifying, as it were? What's your rant?
Well, I mean, with a country with the resources that we have, there is absolutely no excuse for not making the World Cup. Our confederation has basically given us a pass, us in Mexico, every single time just to get to the World Cup because of the amount of money that's available to sponsors and other teams from around the world, dip in our pool with our companies and resources. So for us not to get there is an absolute embarrassment. And with the apologetic media and the punditry from within this country, I don't know how much you guys get to see what's going on here, but it's finally cracked, and everyone is cracked. And I think it's a great thing, as odd as that is to say, about us not making the World Cup. But at the same time, we're really going to miss next summer. And we haven't developed anyone. We had, I think, 12, 30-plus players on our squads for the last few games for the Hex, and that's unacceptable. With missing 2 consecutive Olympics, missing out on a U20 and U17. And yes, we just had we get the glimpses here and there, some great players coming through. Pulisic is purely by accident as far as I'm concerned, because he obviously got most of his training from his pedigree, his father, and then moving, of course, to Dortmund. But there is absolutely no excuse for anything else as far as our country to be missing any tournament at all, and it's a shame. And we're really going to feel the pain coming here soon enough, I think. So it is what it is. It's a hard pill to swallow for us Americans.
I suppose
You're used to being on top, and we're not anymore.
I suppose the good news is that Nigeria's qualified. As a text, answer this one. I'll pass it on to you in a moment, John, but answer this one, if you will, Dan. Sarah, who has got a Brazilian shirt name. Her name's Bardi, by the way. She says, I wonder if the lack of relegation in Major League Soccer or USL leaves the domestic-based American players consequences of not performing to the best of their ability.
100%.
Yeah.
100% true. And that was kind of my question for Tim asked earlier, was our structure in the U.S. is completely non-existent. There is no pro rel. I mean, there's a case, one of the lower leagues is actually appealing to FIFA to see if they can sort of break that and give us pro rel, but there's no real structure there. It's MLS or bust for most teams, most local teams.
Let's get John's thoughts on that, if you will. John, yeah, does Bardi have a point, and does Daniel have a point there?
With respect, I don't actually see that, because, and I'll tell you why. Of course, I cover Mexico very closely, more closely than the United States. I cover Costa Rica. The players in those domestic leagues who are part of the national team structure have the same issue that we're talking about, which is there's no pressure. I don't think that needs to be a pressure to stay in the division. Alexis Sanchez, maybe he's not the best example, but the top player, Messi, doesn't have any pressure to stave off relegation. And Messi doesn't have any pressure anyway. But I think the pressure that players need to feel at their club level to push themselves, to improve, to become better individual players and fit better with a collective is not necessarily against the drop. It's against losing their own place. The U.S. players who are based in Major League Soccer, the Mexican players who are based in Liga MX, the Costa Rican players who are based in the Costa Rican domestic league, there's no one behind them. The leagues aren't deep enough to have players who can take those spots. Or the marketing concerns are such that a coach is never going to bench a player who maybe needs to be sat. It happens now and then, but I think that the players who are based in MLS and in Mexico as well, I think when you see them go to Europe and have to fight for a place. I think that's when you see a lot of the individual development. Perfect example in Mexico of Jesus Corona. He leaves Mexico at a young age, in contrast to most players because the salaries are very lucrative here. Mexico, only one team gets relegated. There's no real pressure on relegation, but you do have to develop yourself as an individual now and then. You could lose your spot. But there's even more competition for a place when he goes to FC 20. I think he had 8 to 9 wingers to compete with in the Netherlands. He wins a starting spot, ends up going to Porto. Now he's a regular starter in an even better league. And I think after the World Cup, we'll probably have a move to an even better one. He's grown in leaps and bounds in the last 4 or 5 years, where had he stayed and stuck around and been a Liga MX starter week in, week out, he knows he's going to start no matter what. He doesn't have to get any better. He doesn't have to improve on his game. So I understand the idea that comes from, and it is something that, again, everything has to be on the table, and maybe everything, has a little bit of things we can take from it. I think the pressure needs to come from fighting for a spot, which MLS players who are on the national team don't have.
Daniel, what's your response to that?
I mean, I know exactly what he's referring to. I mean, you look at the players we've had that have gone and tried to fight for spots overseas. I mean, Landon Donovan, one of our greatest players for the United States, couldn't even land a spot with Leverkusen. He went to fight for that. He had that training camp with Munich. He did well with Everton in a very short spell, but he never really fought for a spot. But he's the exception to the rule, I think. I do see the amount of talent that he's talking about as far as MLS, like a homegrown player, they're starting to come through with MLS. But are they translating to international stage? Not really. And that's a concern because that's the structure that we have. And I feel like that growing pressure for spots is the one thing that we can control for the most part with the clubs. But, the pressure of Pro Rel, like that's every game, every single game. And those players aren't feeling that in MLS or the second and third divisions here. So I think Klinsmann had the right idea. You want players in Europe that are going to compete. And, playing in the second division in Bundesliga,
it's not enough.
Those are the players that we have right now. So
it's not good enough, is it?
Yeah.
Daniel, good to speak to you. Appreciate it. And call up any time as well. Or drop me an email and we'll call you straight back. That's the same for any other listener as well. If you don't know how to get in touch with us, drop us an email at upallnight@bbc.co.uk and put your phone number on it and we'll call you straight back. If you'd like to join in the World Football Phone in the number to call directly if you want to get in touch is 08085 909 693, 08085 909 693. So we're talking football in America, North and South, and all the permutations of making it through to the World Cup or not, as the case may be. A couple of questions that we still have to get through. The questions from Stephen in Australia. Tim, first of all, what about Chile?
Well, first of all,
should I say Chile?
Well, no, as you wish. There is a delicious irony in Chile not making it, which is the following. Last year, both Chile and Peru played Bolivia, who brought on a player for the last 10 minutes, last 15 minutes, who was ineligible. Bolivia brought on a Paraguayan-born centre-back, Nelson Cabrera. He'd lived for Bolivia in 3 years, which is enough to get Bolivian citizenship, but FIFA regulations require a period of 5-year residence. So he was not eligible. So those games, Bolivia had drawn 0-0 with Chile, and they'd beaten Peru 2-0. Both of those games were awarded 3-0 to the opponents. I never liked this, and Chile were the ones who were pushing for this punishment for Bolivia, and I never liked it. Because, all right, Bolivia should have known the rules and you can take the points away from Bolivia. But the idea that these games were awarded 3-0, I don't think that Chile or Peru suffered anything particularly grave from this player playing the last 10 or 15 minutes against them that could turn a 0-0 draw into a 3-0 win or a 2-0 defeat into a 3-0 win. So essentially, Chile got 2 extra points and 3 extra goals. And Peru got 3 extra points and 5 extra goals because again they lost 2-0. They were deemed to have won 3-0. I always hated this, and I was very worried that it was going to have an effect on qualification, that a team was going to miss out because Peru or Chile would have more points than they did as a result of these points given by a tribunal. Well, by a delicious irony, the only thing it had affected was the race for 5th place between Peru and Chile. And Peru have got there. Peru finished 5th and Chile 6th on goal difference. So purely and simply because of those extra points and extra goals, if you take those away, if Bolivia weren't punished or if the points weren't awarded, then Chile would have finished 5th and they would be into the playoff, and Peru would have finished 6th. So serve Chile right for complaining. They should have kept their mouths shut. In what Chile have now is hard times ahead. No doubt about it whatsoever. They don't have a competitive game. Them and the other sides eliminated in South America until the Copa America in the middle of 2019. So that's more than a year and a half with no competitive games. And by that time, the entire generation is over 30 and gone, really. And Arturo Vidal has already announced his retirement, and many others will go. So it's the end of a beautiful story, because that Chile side were great. They're a wonderful side to watch. They played bold, revolutionary football.
Fast.
They always wanted... Yeah, fast, and that was part of the problem. They were played too much and they got too old. I thought it was a huge risk taking the first team to the Confederations Cup this year. They haven't had a summer off since 2013. It's year after year after year of international tournaments, and the older you get, the harder that is to do. The goals have dried up. And they're always very open to the counter-attack. It's the way they play. But the goals have dried up. In the last 6 games they played, the semi-final and final of the Confederations Cup, in the last 4 rounds of the World Cup qualifiers, they didn't manage to score goals in 5 of them. So in the end, they didn't deserve to go. That generation just simply ran out of steam. And the problem is, the cupboard looks very, very bare in terms of replacement. Now, it's very common in South America to have one generation out. And Peru had it in the 70s, and we're still waiting. Maybe this generation, perhaps. Bolivia had it with a generation that qualified them for 94. We're still waiting for another one. Colombia had it late 80s, early 90s. They had to wait a long time to have it again. And Chile will have to wait a long time because their youth sides have been very, very poor. And they have qualified for the World Under-17 Cup that's happening at the moment, but they lost their first game 4-0 to England and then the second 3-0 to Iraq. Other under-20, and the under-20 is the key one. The under-20 side didn't qualify for the World Cup at the level. And you look at young talent and you don't see a great deal there. In part, I think you have to blame the coach, Sampaoli, who won them, now the Argentina coach, who won them that first Copa America in 2015, because he didn't care about the under-20 side. And there was no connect between the senior ranks and the under-20 side. And I think that's a mistake, and I think Chile will pay for that mistake, and it could well be a fair few years until we see from them anything like the level of football that we've seen and enjoyed so much over the last decade.
And John, what was the question that Stephen in Australia posed to you?
Wants to know about Honduras, who Australia is playing. I believe he asked if this Honduras is better than the one that crashed out of the previous World Cup. The answer is no. I think they're worse. I was really surprised to see them sneak into the playoff. Of course, again, that's partly because of the U.S. It's a team that is not fast. They are very aggressive, very physical. I think the first leg will be difficult for Australia. It's not an easy journey. It's not an easy place to play, San Pedro Sula. And again, the team is just sort of hard-nosed. They've got a young midfielder in Brian Acosta who just sits in front of the back line and will foul you. The defenders are tough. Minor Figueroa, who's been around forever, listeners will remember him maybe from Wigan. He's still the fulcrum of the team, the captain. He's playing center back, even though he plays some left back at club level. It's just a hard-nosed team, and I think that first leg might be tough, but I like the Socceroos' chances in the second leg. I've talked about Honduras a bit in the past and how they have had really no replacement, especially forward-wise, and they had some great players, Carlo Costly, Georgie Welcome, other goal scorers, Carlos Pavon, these guys who were sort of great forwards for Honduras, and they really had no one to replace them. They have 2 guys coming through now. Albert Ellis is starting to prove himself at the international level. He's young. And Romel Kyoto, his club teammate with the Houston Dynamo. Both of those guys have shown a little bit more of a tendency to find the back of the net at the international level than they were previously. So maybe there's a bit of hope for Honduras. I like Australia's chances. I'm not saying that Steven should book his tickets yet, but I think the Socceroos have a very good chance to get out of the playoff.
I disagree with, and this is one of our listeners, I disagree with Tim regarding it possibly being Messi's last World Cup. His talent is so unique that he'll be surely still playing in the World Cup finals well into his late 30s. Well, that would be a question mark about the Argentina team of the day, wouldn't it?
Well, the only thing is, will he want to? I mean, the sacrifices that these players make to play for their national teams are extraordinary, and European players just wouldn't do it. The amount of travelling time that they go through, and the abuse that they get when things go wrong. You know, it's you wonder sometimes why they do it. Is whether he'll want to keep putting his body through all of this. And I remember Alan Shearer telling me this during the last World Cup, that he retired from international football. He was England captain, and he loved being England captain, but he retired from international football before he was 30 because it was the only way that he could prolong his career at top level. You don't see that many South Americans do that, it is amazing because you look at, and I'm not in any way having a go at Alan Shearer here, but if you look at Alan Shearer's international career, I think he played one game outside Europe. It was that famous trip to China, just before Euro '96. I think that's the only international that he played outside Europe. So, the amount of travelling that Messi has to do, and he's there year after year after year, and he briefly flirted with the idea of retiring from international football just over a year ago, quickly went back on his word, just as well for Argentina, because they wouldn't have qualified without him. So the question is, I think, how much longer will he want to do it? And Mascherano, who's a few years older, but Mascherano is now saying, finally, that's it for me. After the World Cup, that's it. I don't want to know anymore. And I would imagine that there'll be a few others, even a little bit younger, who might think the same thing. And Messi could be one of them. So, but anyway, there is a time limit on this. It ain't going to be forever. Enjoy it while it lasts.
Yeah, John, Tim's kindly dropped Alan Shearer's name in twice. Do you want to name drop yourself? You got a moment to do it in. If you want to
name drop myself? Yeah. No, myself.
Oh, okay. Very good. Chris says, am I the only one puzzled as to why managers started talking about their quote-unquote philosophy? To me, at least, it sounds like managers are trying to pass themselves off as budget Machiavellis or Platos. Wouldn't it be more accurate and less frustrating to simply discuss their style of play? John, style of play versus philosophy, which is it for you?
I don't know. I don't have a problem with either term. I think that philosophy, look, maybe it, because we use it to describe, the great thinkers, maybe it is a bit. I can understand why it comes off as maybe an inflated ego, but I think, it definitely does go beyond the style of play. I mean, you look at someone like, Bielsa, dipping into his region. His philosophy extends beyond. He has a very distinct style of play, but his philosophy extends to the training ground. It extends to physical condition. It extends to, how players should spend their free time. It is distinct from his style of play. Now, you would say that the style of play, I think, is part of his philosophy. So I think it feeds into it. I mean, again, maybe you want to use a different word, but I think that, look, maybe it's because I'm in a weak place, because the U.S., I think, needs philosophy. I think we need some sort of thinking and ideas about where we're going and what we're doing. And that goes beyond exactly what we're going to be doing on the field of play with the style of play. So that's what I think.
Tim, KRS-One said, I'm a philosopher. I think very deeply. So
I think very deeply.
Exactly.
Yes, I've seen him do it. Yeah.
I've seen him do it. He was a mate of mine once upon a time, Genuinely.
You're joking.
No, I'm not joking. You name drop Alan Shearer, I had to talk about my Boogie Down Productions. But let's leave that to one side. So is it philosophy or is it just a style of play?
For me, it's idea of play. An idea of play includes everything I want. I agree with whoever sent that question. Philosophy is a little bit overblown, isn't it? It's just too much. It's going too much. It always reminds me, when people talk about their philosophy of play, it reminds me, and if you haven't seen it, go and check it out on YouTube. It is fantastic. The Monty Python football game between the Greek philosophers and the German philosophers.
Of course.
It is, it is the funniest thing there's ever been connected with football.
But we're old enough to have seen it live when it was first shown on television. Yeah. Surely you saw it first time around, did you? You have to go to YouTube to see all these things. It was funny.
But Jon's generation, Jon Arnold's generation, I thought that was magical there, Jon saying, because the enormity of this hadn't hit me, but Jon's generation, who I categorise as the Katy Perry generation, for them, this is the first, this is the first World Cup. that the young Americans, that they haven't seen their team qualify for, and that will have a huge effect. See, I remember the first 2 World Cups that I was old enough to watch, to follow. England didn't qualify, so I didn't have my team there. So I kind of grew up without England being there. But John and his Katy Perry lot, they've grown up with watching their own team in the World Cup finals. So there is a young generation over there who are too young to have seen that Monty Python thing the first time around.
Let's turn this around. Don't be embarrassed about being a member of the Katy Perry generation, John. I'll have that. I'll use that again, no doubt. Johnny in Reigate, though, is saying, look, England qualified for the World Cup with a game to spare. Wales crashed out. Northern Ireland needed playoffs. Scotland didn't make it. But to hear and read the narrative from over here, you'd think it was the other way around. People are so down on England. It's the same old statements over and over again about losing to Iceland, which is disrespectful to them as a team, top of their group, lack of players and boring games. Sutton, Waddle and Wright take it in turn to be critical, it says here. Are there other countries in your regions where a country has qualified but no one gives the qualifying team praise at all for qualifying? What about in your CONCACAF region, John? Is there a team that has qualified and people just think, nah, they qualified, but so what? No biggie.
Absolutely. I'm sitting in it. I'm in Mexico right now, and it's a country where the football hasn't been bad lately. They nearly finished the final round of World Cup qualification undefeated. They fell in the final match day to Honduras, a desperate team, a team that needed a win to make the playoff. Mexico was leading the game. They didn't play well. It was a really ugly game. As I just mentioned, Honduras is a team that wants to ugly up the game, that wants to muddy the waters. But Mexican fans in general, although there are some who defend him, and the press for sure hate their coach, Juan Carlos Osorio. They think their team is playing really poorly. They don't have any high expectations. They take it as a given that Mexico should qualify for the World Cup. And again, they're probably right too, as the U.S. should and didn't. But yeah, in Mexico, they're excited about the World Cup. I think that they are sort of reluctantly optimistic, maybe would be the right term, because I don't think they like how the team plays. They don't like Osorio, and yet they're qualified. And from my outsider's perspective, I think they'll have a decent, if not good, World Cup.
Listen, this question has been aimed at Tim, but I want both of you to answer it. You'll see why in a moment. Because Sergey, apparently we read out his email last week, and he was so delighted, he quite literally danced on the streets of Moscow. Now, you can't get better than that, can you? I wonder what dance he did, though. Anyway, let's twist again like we did last summer, because what he wants to hear from you, Tim, is about the Brazilian goalkeeper Guilherme, who played in Russia for some time and became the first Brazilian player who played for their national team. What does Tim think of that story? We also have this cliche about Brazilian goalkeepers who are quote unquote not good enough, and great Russian schools of goalkeeping with the likes of Lev Yashin, Rinat Darsev, etc. And here we are. So I want John to answer that as well, because contradictorily, America is always known for its good goalkeeping. Maybe not contradictorily. Anyway, Tim first.
Well, I think there's been a before or an after moment with Brazilian goalkeeping, and that was Tafarel, who was first seen in the World Cup of 1990, and was exciting. He played 3 World Cups with barely a mistake, and he was so calm, and that opened doors for Brazilian goalkeepers. And I think the standard of Brazilian goalkeepers has gone up and up and up in recent years, and they've become an exporter of goalkeepers. And this position was looking a little bit dicey for the World Cup. They've stuck with a fella called Alisson. They stuck with him last year when he didn't get a game for Roma. He was on the bench. He's now first choice. He's doing very, very well, and he's never let them down. He looks very, very good. And Ederson of Manchester City made his international debut against Chile and looks very much at home. So they've got another one there for the long term, a little kind of prototype Manuel Neuer that I think Ederson is. So they've become a producer of goalkeepers. When they started selling goalkeepers to Italy, you knew that this position was no longer a problem.
We're talking football in America, North and South, this morning with our Neymar Jon Arnold, who's in Mexico for us, and also the legendary Tim Vickery, who's in Rio. Take care of any questions you've got on North and South American football, respectively, and players from over there playing in our leagues. This question for you, John, this is from Graham in Vancouver, who wants to know why football is typically or has typically not been a fan favourite in the States. I've heard reasons such as ties, lack of goals, etc. But typically more popular US sports are long, lots of stoppages, long season and potentially low scoring, particularly the NFL and baseball. Why do fans not warm to football as much as they perhaps could do stateside?
I think if I had the answer to that question, maybe we'd be calling for my removal as the head of president of US.
Fair enough, but have a guess, have a stab at it.
I think we've for a long time we've said, oh, maybe it's ties, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. I think it's changed. I think one of the sort of weird positives I've seen from the elimination is just how frustrated and disappointed not just soccer fans, but just sports fans in the U.S. have been. I mean, I think it's hit hard everywhere. You've heard everyone talking about it with different levels of eloquence or knowledge about the game or what have you, and that's great. That's fine. If someone doesn't follow the sport and then is upset about the World Cup, okay. I mean, obviously, I'd like some nice analysis, but I think it's changed. And I think because, I was sort of looking up, there was a piece that ran in a journalism magazine, blog, website, and it said, oh, well, this World Cup elimination didn't register. And the journalist, in no disrespect, I'm sure he's fine, he talked to 2 former sports editors and a former sports writer. Well, the majority of football fans, overwhelmingly in the United States, are below the age of 25. So yeah, of course, a couple guys in their 50s or 60s aren't going to think that this was a big deal. But the young people in the country are feeling it. The young people are liking it. And I don't think it has anything to do with, oh, well, now we're okay with ties. I mean, I think it's just that we've had the sport available to us. My Katy Perry generation, whatever you want to call us, we've grown up with a domestic league. We've grown up with a successful national team to some extent, and we've had the game around us. It just wasn't available in the 80s, 70s, and I'm not sure why. I don't know why it didn't work. Some of it was financial. I think some of it was marketing, and that is why we talk so much about marketing the U.S. game and why we're a little more commercial maybe than in other places. But I think that I think it's changed. I think that it's growing despite this elimination. I think it's going to keep growing, and I think it's going to be mentioned in the same breath as hockey, baseball soon. And look, with the dangers of American football that we've seen, players, injuries that affect them long term, who knows if American football is going to stay on the top of the heap for long. So I think that it's on a positive trajectory and is breaking through as truly a major sport in the U.S.
Tim, do you get the sense that John resents that Katy Perry generation thing? I mean,
no, it came from him.
I know,
he did it originally. We were talking about Jennifer Lopez, and he said, my generation, I'm more into Katy Perry. So it's a label that he has put upon himself. So if he doesn't like it, then
The only thing I'm frustrated about is that I can't name drop her. You guys have met all your heroes, but Katy Perry now.
We haven't.
Oh no, we haven't. I didn't get to love Lucy, as much as I could have wanted to, but not quite my generation. Anyway, let's talk to Vincent, who is in Australia, down under. Good morning.
Yeah, hi Don.
How are you? You're right.
Tim. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah. I wanted to discuss what it's like here in Australia. I've got my son in an academy, and the impact that has on his opportunities to go through the youth leagues and the A-League at the moment. How there's no second division, and it really did strike a point to me in the early conversations at the beginning. So. We and a lot of young kids and parents have to often pay extra money to get them into academies if the kids show potential. So here, even if they get into a competitive youth league side, there is still some cost, and there's even more cost with other European clubs now forming academies here, such as Barcelona and AC Milan, for example. And with they often, as many all around the world youth have to do, they have to trial for places in the youth leagues in their area. And there's often a lot of competition, and sometimes, I'm sure it happens everywhere else, the competition's often based on money. You hear things, and I think that really comes down to lack of opportunities and the amount of players that can get into a team. And that is also affected by the other sports, say in Australia, like in the US, where there's a lot of ruthless competition going around. And here in Australia, I think there are over 1 million people play football where there's also rugby league, rugby union, AFL football, and there's a lot of competition there. And so the funds don't come down. I think AFL football and NRL got $1 billion funds over a number of years, and the A-League only got $70 million over about 3 years. So there's a lot of competition here, and it has an effect on the kids going through and the opportunities, and often some of them are lost.
I got you. And for your son in particular, what exactly would you like Tim and John to maybe comment on with regards to your son? What position does he play, by the way?
He can play anywhere in defence, left, right, centre back. He's a bit of an all-rounder. He's probably good on the right. So he's 14 at the moment.
But the problem for you and him essentially is the lack of opportunity, yeah?
Yes.
Lack of opportunity.
And with this, and how that relates to the second division team. And I guess the question is, I can hear that in the US there's almost a parallel type of system
in the US,
with no second division.
Yeah, that's why I was going to get Jon Arnold to comment on it first of all. Then, John, what would you suggest, or do you accept the parallel that Vincent's making with the United States in the academy levels and so on? How do kids there get the opportunities in that case?
Yeah, it's difficult, and I think that's where it starts. And there is a second division there are two second divisions, strangely enough, in the U.S., but there's no pro rel. But I think that the real parallel that I see or hear is that the academies are difficult to get into. A lot of times you have to pay more money to be in them, and then sometimes there's competition between academies. Sometimes there's competition for one kid specifically, or sometimes it's a kid can't get a chance. It's difficult. I think that a lot of it too comes down to, every parent in the U.S. wants their kid to be on the best team, and there can only be one best team, and there can only be one team that sort of is winning sort of league championships. But does that matter at that level? I think the other thing is, a lot of parents want their kid to be on the best team or to have the best coach. And in the U.S., we do have a shortage of good coaches at the youth level and farther down. I mean, I think when kids are starting, bless the dads who are out there who have no experience, who are trying to, teach their kid, all right, you can kick it with your left foot too. That's allowed, or okay, like this is what a corner kick is. But we do need a higher standard there. And I think that's where it starts. And I think that's where I'm hearing some of the parallels, is that some of the opportunities aren't there because, everyone wants to be on one or two teams because those are the teams who are, have a coach that's dedicated, committed to teaching the right skills.
So would you suggest then that a father like Vincent should say to their child, well, maybe it's better to go through a much more local route than a prestigious academy then?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's tough too because in a country that's as big as the U.S. and Australia is quite large geographically as well, I know, it's then tough to get spotted, right? So you do have this paradox of, well, I want my kid to be in the best teams and have the opportunity to be seen and get into the best programs with, kind of paired with, I want my kids to be part of the local community and not have to drive 2 hours, 3 hours to get to a team and that sort of thing. So it is this juxtaposition. I think that the U.S. Federation, at least from what I can speak to, needs to do a better job of sort of making – I guess it needs to be more involved in places where maybe there aren't MLS teams. MLS academies have just started, so I think we're only now seeing the fruits of that. But if you're not living close to them, you can't just be so out of luck. You have to be able to develop players from other places.
Just on that theme, before I come to Tim, just on that theme, Vincent, are there opportunities in amateur football? Will there be people looking at amateur footballers, scouts or whatever it might be, that might be reporting to the A-League and so on? Could your son basically pursue a course down the amateur path rather than trying to get into the professional league straight away, if you see what I mean?
Yes, I think there are. But I think for me is the degree to which it's there and it's available. And I think that comes into part of the difficulties with the opportunities. So yes, I've seen my younger son plays in the local association, and yes, I've seen some of the scouts there, but they'll be scouts from the local community. It is there, obviously, but my concern is that there are a lot of young kids who families may not have the funds, who show the promise, and this happens, I guess, I know it happens all over the world, but I think in environments such as Australia, perhaps the US, with all the extra competition, you really can't take advantage of it. And over time, especially since 2006, you mentioned before, the World Cup, I think that's what we're seeing. The problem is that I've lost my train of thought.
Don't worry.
That if you're not tapping into getting that youth, seeing what it is at that age, at the younger age, and the youth that perhaps don't have the financial resources to get into an academy, then that might show what we're seeing now in Australia and the US.
But let's say... Go on, finish your point.
Yeah, that was just it. I think that's just what we're seeing in the replication, perhaps.
I suspect it's slightly different from not least Brazilian perspective, let alone anywhere else in South America, Tim, because football is such an export product in South America, or in Brazil particularly, that people are getting snapped up from the age of 5 or 6 or 7, whether they're in an academy or not.
Yeah, well, and there are people who can make money out of them, so that changes the economics of it. But anyway, it's a working class sport. It's a mass. I'm amazed at this from Australia about this kind of replication of almost a US pay to play model. I'm absolutely astonished. Well, Australia is such a sporting nation, and it punches above its weight, or it has punched above its weight. So in so many sports, cricket and swimming and both codes of rugby and Aussie rules, and so I'd have thought that they would have that structure. They would know how to put that structure in place. So I'm amazed by this pay to play kind of financial barrier, which obviously means that you're not funneling through the system many of your most promising youngsters. I can use this as an excuse to talk about the salon of my better half, because she was just telling me this week that one of her clients has a kid, maybe 10, and he's really, wants to be a professional footballer, and so he's doing everything that. And this is from a very upper middle class background, and this is relatively rare. So I said to her indoors, I said, I bet that he is really suffering prejudice as a result of being from this wealthy background, the kind of background from which you can pay to play, should it be necessary. And she said, yeah, that's exactly what his mum said. It's a very, very different environment. The idea of there are football schools here where people do have to pay money. But if you show talent, someone is going to pick up on that. If you show talent in some place, we don't necessarily have to pay for play. Someone is going to pick up on that, and you are going to be discovered. You're going to be found. You're going to be pushed through a system if you really want to do it. So this idea of pay for play for a mass sport like football, I just think it's madness.
Yeah, Vincent, thanks a lot for the call. 08085 909 693 is the number to call if you'd like to join us for this morning's World Football Phone-In. If you don't know how to get through by phone, you can drop us an email here at upallnight@bbc.co.uk. Include your phone number and we'll call you back. Oh, by the way, John, you'll be pleased to know that some of our listeners have offered tips on how America can do better in future World Cups. Are you interested?
I truly thought you were going to say get in touch with Katy Perry. I would much rather hear how America needs to get in touch with America.
Well, let me throw that one out there as well for John's benefit. If anybody knows, without calling Russell Brand, by the way, if anybody knows how to get in touch with Katy Perry, do let us know. Anyway, you're going to hear this advice whether you like it or not, by the way. Frank, who's a Wycombe Wanderers fan of a lifetime, says to win the World Cup, and he says soccer stroke football, either way. Do you want to win the World Cup in soccer or football? Which do you prefer, Yank?
Soccer. We win the world. There is the World Cup of football. We win it every time.
That was a low blow. Okay, to win the World Cup in soccer. What's the point of having a World Cup in NFL when you would win it? Yeah, everybody knows that you... And you'll win the Basketball World Cup as well. We know that. Yeah, you get the gold medal in the Olympics. Yeah. Anyway, to win the World Cup in soccer in 2022, the USA should do the two following things. Any idea what they are?
Oh, I can't even begin to guess.
Well, the first one is call the boss of the USA team the manager instead of that ridiculous word coach. Yeah, you down with that?
I mean, there are some people who call it manager, and we didn't do so hot this time around.
Okay,
all right, let's hear this.
Yeah. But this one will do it for you. It says entice Big Sam Allardyce out of retirement with a huge load of dollars. Apparently, he likes his cash, and make him the USA manager. Big Sam would be guaranteed to win the World Cup with the USA in 2022. You heard it here first. Yeah, you happy?
I think. Yeah, we'll go on to the next one then.
Well, he says, by the way, Big Sam does love the USA. Oh, the next one's not so much advice.
He loves the USA.
Well, it's a conclusion. Richard says, if you want to see the reason America doesn't get football, look no further than that episode where the Simpsons go to a soccer match. Priceless. Have you seen that one?
What stays in my mind is the commercial for the game, and it says, we're going to see who the best country in the world is, Mexico or Portugal, and that's. But I'm not sure if that's the same episode. I'm not a big Simpsons head.
Okay, and this is from Dave in Gravesend for you, Tim. He says, please pass this message on to Tim. A company called Philosophy Football sell a T-shirt celebrating that Monty Python football sketch.
Excellent.
Yeah, he owns one. So, go and find it wherever you can. Okay, for John Old Tim, how did Panama's first goal even stand at all? What was the ref or assistants thinking? What do you think?
That's me. Not sure. I mean, clearly saw something wrong. What happened was there was on Panama's first goal, they ended up beating Costa Rica 2-1. On the first goal, the ball didn't cross the line. I mean, it truly didn't go in. And one thing culturally that's interesting is that I think, and maybe even no, because it made the front page in Honduras, who would have, been affected as well. If Panama had drawn that game, I think Honduras would have jumped into the automatic place. So it was on the front page of the Honduran sports press that this is called a ghost goal, a gol de fantasma. In the U.S., we haven't talked about it too much, and I think it's just sort of we've accepted our fate and decided we need to make changes. FIFA. There was talk about maybe a FIFA appeal or something, but yeah, the referees blew the call. The ball didn't cross the line, but the goal was given. And look, the U.S. didn't do their job. Honduras did what they needed to do. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what happened, and we haven't gotten any. That is one area I'd like to improve is seeing some ref accountability. At least saying,
hey, don't blame it on the ref. Don't blame it on the ref. A carpenter should never blame his tools. You know
I think we should be able to ask, maybe not in a press conference setting, but, a written question to referees after a game. Yeah. What did you see on this play? Why did you award the goal?
As the football coaches always like to say, it swings in roundabouts, it evens itself out over the course of a World Cup cycle, is what they would like to say. By the way, I think the news is just filtering through to some of our listeners, because John in Salford says the USA, didn't they qualify? They qualify. I can't do the Scottish accent. They qualify? Question mark. Also, Max says, who are the smallest teams in the experts regions? Because Gordon Strachan said that Scottish players' genetics doesn't help them, and it could be the reason that they didn't qualify. That didn't qualify is coming back as a theme to haunt them. Owen is with us in Oregon. Owen, good morning.
Hi, I'm actually an Irish guy living in Oregon. I've emailed before, but this is my first time calling.
Well done, you. Well done for calling, anyway. Appreciate that.
So I can have a question for each person. For Tim, back in Ireland, I'm like a Cork City fan. And the League of Ireland, I find, is a very underrated league. And sometimes we do punch above our weight, especially with the amount of spectators versus good players. So like the Republic of Ireland national team doesn't have any active League of Ireland players, but most of the team at this stage is former League of Ireland players and are doing really well, and it's generally underrated. And there's still a lot of young talent in the League of Ireland that
come on, Sligo. Come on, Sligo. Come on, the bit of red. Come on, Sligo.
Yeah, but unfortunately, Cork City are going to win the league, and Sligo don't have a chance.
I know.
Anyway, and then for John, I have a question more about like the league structure in North America. I live in Portland, and for the Timbers, the starting price for tickets is around $45, which isn't cheap, and it's an okay standard of football, but they also sell out every game, which makes it hard to get tickets. So I'm a season ticket holder for the second team, and that's driving about an hour to get to games, and it's good value, but a lot of the country has no professional football to watch within driving distance. And I think that's another problem with soccer in the United States. And if there was more minor league clubs, by American terminology, it might help grow the sport more.
That's interesting. We'll come on to John's answer to that. But Tim, first of all, with regards to Cork City.
Yeah, not really my region, and I don't have a great deal to say about it, but I'm very glad to learn that a lot of people from this national team have come through those League of Ireland clubs. And the League, it caught my attention all those years ago when Roy Keane came straight over to Nottingham Forest from, was it Cobe? I'm sorry if my pronunciation is wrong on that. And you got straight in there to Nottingham Forest, and without any adaptation time whatsoever, bang, he's there at the level. Then, these League of Ireland sides I've never really taken seriously. Maybe there's more talent there, and it seems from what you're telling me that there are a few kind of potential Roy Keanes feeding through to the national team through the League of Ireland.
They're hard. That's what Roy Keane showed us. They're hard. They've got the hard nuts. They can take the rough and tumble. That's to put it mildly. And what about what's Owen's proposing about minor teams, minor leagues in local areas? John, does that make sense to you?
Well, it's true, but they're growing as well. I mean, there are more teams being added every year to USL, NASL. We've talked about it a bit on the program. In a legal battle with US Soccer is struggling to sort of get the right amount of teams. But again, as I've said before, I think it would be great if they can also become successful and prosperous and have teams. We talked to someone, I think, in Nashville. Now Nashville has a team. There's teams popping up all over the place. And yeah, I mean, that gives players a place to play. That gives, young players a place to catch on and develop. That's the idea, right? And I think it gives people an opportunity to fall in love with football. So
but does it help? Does it help in terms of like the national team and the standard of football? Do you think that? I mean, Owen's making a valid point. If you can't drive to see a game, then you're probably not going to be that interested in the sport, are you?
Maybe. I mean, there's a lot of. I think Americans are used to driving longer distances to see sport or see things in general. But yeah, I mean, but like I said, I mean, I think that's something that is going in the right direction. There's a lot of things that aren't. Real quick on the other one, Panama is in the same situation. They have one domestic-based player, but everyone else is out of the country. And I think every player started in the Panamanian League. Not anything to say about the league growing, but that's similar to Ireland.
Yeah, and not to talk of Nigeria, which didn't qualify, if you see what I mean. I mean, thanks very much. 08085. I'm going to do a jig. Why not? I'll do just a little jig, okay? Don't begrudge me that. Just a little tiny jig. Nigeria qualified. Oh, by the way, I'm an England fan. 08085 909 693. Divided loyalties. If we meet in the final, well, it would be very difficult to decide one way or another. Oh, by the way, John, Johnny in Salford has suggested, you lot have your worries, but we've got our worries over here as well. Because imagine if England were to meet Iceland in the World Cup finals in Russia. Yeah, tense one. Martin, who's listening in Thailand, says, if you haven't already, can you please mention the fact that it's the men's US team that's in crisis? The women's team have won the World Cup 3 times and are still the best in the world. It's a good point, isn't it, John?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm excited to see how the women's players kind of take part of the direction, because they've had problems with the federation about fairness. We've talked about their pay issues, the issues of playing on turf fields when the men don't have to play on turf as much. So I'm excited to, I hope that they'll take a leadership role. And I wouldn't be at all upset to see a former U.S. women's player put her hat in the ring for maybe federation president. I think, like I said, Sunil Gulati, he's done a lot. He's a big figure. They need some strong contenders if there's any chance of seeing change at the top of the federation, which again, I think is needed at this point. So I would love to see a woman step forward and perhaps take a position of leadership, and I think that'd be phenomenal. Yeah,
Tim, Faisal in Birmingham says he's a real sucker for following the World Cup because it holds an abundance in character from as much top teams and players as possible. For example, the likes of Sanchez and Vidal of Chile, who are missing out, and that is really disappointing for Faisal. My question, he says, out of dejection, is why were Brazil, who were already through, so keen on hitting 3 past Chile? And what do you make of Falcao's vocal involvement with the Peru players, and if there will be any action taken?
No, I don't think so. What he's referring to here is all the games were played at the same time. And towards the end of the action, Peru are 1-1 against Colombia. And with Chile losing 2-0, that's a result that gets Colombia through automatically and Peru into the playoff place. So they have a little, this result is all right for, and then no one crosses the halfway line anymore. It's just so it ends up, but just for the last few minutes. And it's very, very hard to prove that there was kind of consenting agreement there, and it looks like Chile aren't going to moan about it. And quite right, after what we were talking about earlier on, with Chile protesting and getting extra points, but then losing out because Peru got more extra points. There is one thing to say about the goal that effectively eliminated Chile. It was the goal that gave Peru a draw and took Peru above Chile in the. And this explains why in my South American team, David Ospina is now not only on the bench, he's not in the squad anymore. Colombia's Arsenal goalkeeper. Colombia are winning 1-0, and then Peru have a free kick around right channel, around 26 metres from goal, something like that. Up steps the centre forward, Paulo Guerrero. It's an indirect free kick. What does that mean if it goes straight into the goal? It means it's no goal. So Ospina, if Ospina had just leant against his own goalpost reading the newspaper, great. But what did Ospina do? he tried to save it, and he got a touch on it. And the fact that he got a touch on it meant that it's a goal. So it goes down as an own goal. It has to be an own goal because Guerrero cannot score directly from an indirect free kick. So that from Ospina is that goal is the reason that Chile aren't going. Why did Brazil not ease off? Well, remember, Brazil have got their own traumas to deal with, and one of the. Go on.
I was just going to say, I think you're a bit harsh on Ospina, though, because you imagine that situation. As a goalie, you've got to try and save it. Your instinct takes over. You're not thinking, well, hang on, it's direct, it's indirect, and it's also, did it touch anybody else beforehand? You just don't know.
Yeah, there is that. All right. But I did pick him 2 weeks ago, so
I know, remember,
I liked him then, but I don't like him anymore.
I know. He's a gooner after all.
Indeed, yeah. So imagine what Alexis Sanchez is saying to him now that they've both met up at Arsenal. Imagine that conversation. But with Brazil, now remember what went wrong for them and what went horribly wrong for them in the last World Cup, where a year before the World Cup, they beat Spain 3-0 in the final of the Confederations Cup. And they honestly thought, and I saw the then coach Scolari give a lecture to Brazilian coaches when he said, "We have done the hard work. We've got our team." They honestly thought, and when the team joined up at the end of the European season, in the end of May, before the World Cup, they said, we have one hand on the trophy. Because they really, that team that had won the Confederations Cup before, they thought was going to win the World Cup. So that they'd set everything in stone a full year before. Now, they're not going to make that mistake again. So the current coach, Chichi, what does he want to do between now and the World Cup? He wants to make sure that the team didn't peak too soon. So he will do everything to maintain a level of intensity, to maintain a competition for places. He has to be loyal to those who've achieved great results for him, but he has to keep them on their toes as well, which means that Brazil's friendlies are going to be really interesting because it's all about maintaining that level of performance. And you lot over there, Dotun, will have a chance to see them. November the 14th, they come to Wembley. They badly want and badly need experience against the top European sides. England do not really fall into that category, do they? But it's still a different experience away from home against a side that qualified with relative ease for the World Cup. They've got Germany in March, which is even bigger for them, given all that Germany represent and that 7-1 defeat. But what it's all about with Brazil is trying to make sure that they haven't peaked too soon.
Stephen Birmingham says, I think the reason USA qualifies normally all the time for the World Cup is because CONCACAF is so weak. They just messed it up this time around. Maybe they should have an all...
But hang on. Remember Costa Rica last time? Remember the group that England were in?
Yeah.
It was England, Italy, Uruguay, Costa Rica. And all of England and all of Italy and all of Uruguay said, well, all right, it's between us three and, by how much we beat Costa Rica by. Which of those four teams went the furthest? Indeed.
Costa Rica.
We'll make a Geordie of you yet.
I think the CONCACAF, it's not, certainly South America harder to qualify from. And I would say Europe and maybe even Africa harder. But CONCACAF qualification is not easy at all. I think when you look at some of the road trips that you have to take, winning away in Honduras, a difficult environment, away in Panama, a difficult environment. So it should probably be a given. But, even Mexico last time around, and they had an okay World Cup. They got out of the group and everything as well. They had to go to a playoff last time and beat New Zealand. So I know we didn't even hear the full email. Let's hear the rest of it.
Well, yeah, Steve is suggesting that maybe you should have an all-American qualifying group so we could all have more interest in it and the teams who go through would really deserve it if the USA was in competition with the likes of Argentina and Brazil and so on.
Do you know how big the Americas are?
Yeah, we know. You always tell us.
Absolutely huge.
Yeah, you always tell us.
Huge.
Yeah.
The distance between Canada and Uruguay.
Huge, and yet, and Africa's
it ain't that big.
Whoa, yeah, it's not as lengthy. You're right. Fair enough. But it's still big. You would agree.
And we're going to keep hearing. I mean, Tim, look, man, we're going to hear those questions all the time, and we get it, and I understand the reason behind it. But I will say I'll push back a bit on the worthy, because I think that Panama, by coming out of CONCACAF qualification, has proven that it is worthy of a spot. And the CONCACAF teams in the previous World Cup, as Tim alludes to, were not bad at all. So, well, with the exception of Honduras maybe. But 3 of the 4, that ain't bad.
Well, Patrick, who by now would have got to work, he's been on his motorcycle, but he sent this email before he went on the old bike. He says, first, a huge thank you to Tim for his scouting pointers of Richarlison of Watford. When I rang up last time, he's been pretty much as the Legendino said he would be. Not sure if Tim has seen...
No, he's been better.
Yeah, not sure if Tim...
Been better than... I thought there was something there. I got a bit discontent with him this year. I was big on him early in the year, and then he frustrated me a little bit. And he's done much better than I expected, which is great. I'm very, very happy for him.
Yeah. And anyway, the question is, for both of you, in your respective regions, how do some teams see the not-so-level playing field of World Cup qualification? For example, South America seems vastly overrepresented with only 12 teams in the region.
Only 10. Well, there's only 10. All right, but we can put that one to bed instantly.
Go on.
In 2010, Uruguay finished 5th in South America and had to go through a playoff. They came 4th in the world. No, that is called strength in depth. In the last 2 World Cups, in the last 2 World Cups, only one South American team was not able to get out of the group, which was Ecuador last time around, by a little margin. And if you look at it in terms of results, the continent which is massively overrepresented is Europe. Europe provides the best teams for the World Cup, but the dullest teams, the teams that just clog it up, are from Europe as well. So, no, I ain't having it.
How about you, John? Are you having it or not?
No, not at all. I mean, and we talk about the interest, of combining the Americas, and I think the Copa America Centenario surpassed my expectations for being fun and interesting to watch. But while I've been covering CONCACAF, and I think it might be bad competitively for CONMEBOL, the South American governing body, being able, with the games on Thursday, I'm able to watch a lot of the games. And man, it was dramatic this year. The qualification, if you want to talk about entertainment value, I don't think you need to toss the U.S., Mexico, Costa Rica in with the South American teams. I think that 10-team round robin thing they got going was compelling. Of course, all this is going out the window because the World Cup is going to be expanded, but I think we'll enjoy the last sort of traditional, I guess, or what we've come to know as traditional qualification next time around. But this time, I think the South Americans, if you kept up, it was brilliant.
Doesn't that really look like a shame now, John? On that Tuesday night was so brilliant. It was so dramatic. And even if your side was fell short, but at least that it's part of the drama of sport. And all over the world, there were dramatic things happening. And you think we're only going to get one more chance at this because after that, with a 48-team World Cup, it just takes all the drama out of the qualification process.
With Sergio Aguero making a somewhat miraculous fast recovery from his rib injury sustained in a car crash, do you experts have any other examples of players recovering from injury much quicker than anticipated? Rishi, Newcastle upon Tyne was no. John, any idea? Anybody? Fast recovery from injury.
It happens, and it usually makes me very nervous when it happens. I cover FC Dallas, the Dallas MLS team, on a week-to-week basis. The player who came back, it was expected to be about 6 weeks, comes back in 4 weeks, and you just wonder, is he being rushed back? Is he okay? I mean, obviously the medical staff and trainers know better than we do. But it always, especially if there's a player as well with an Achilles injury, Mauro Diaz, the Argentine who Tim has mentioned before, and the first couple games he's back, every time he puts weight on it or, he gets a tackle, you just, kind of suck in your breath and just hope it doesn't, something doesn't happen. In America, we also had Stuart Holden, when he was able to get on the field, a phenomenal player. But so often had knee injuries and other issues. So, I can't think of one that was sort of a strange injury situation or a, like a car crash, that kind of thing at the moment. But certainly players have come back quickly, and sometimes it just makes you worry.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a car crash, Tim. What about from your side?
Well, I suppose the specialist in this really is Luis Suarez. Remember in the last World Cup, when he was injured before the competition, and it looked like, and he might not even play, but just maybe the third game, if not the knockout. And then Uruguay lost their first game to Costa Rica. So that means, they're up against England and Italy. and they got to win. They got to win 2 games. So they rushed him back for the England game. And who tips the balance in the game? Luis Suarez. He scores both the goals as England are beaten 2-1. And he's done this a few times for his country. He'll come back, he'll get injured, and he'll come back sooner. But John's absolutely right. It does make you nervous because there is a risk here. And one player who you think about, again with the World Cup, running that risk, is the Colombian striker Radamel Falcao Garcia, who injured himself very badly a few months before the last World Cup and worked like mad to try and get back for the World Cup and wasn't able to do it, but really, really tried. And it looked for a while as if that might be the end of him as a player. He then came to England and he wasn't really getting a sequence of games and he didn't really look right. And it's only been in the last year, really, with Monaco that he's begun to get his mojo back. And you wonder how much of a price he paid for trying to rush back and get to that World Cup 3 years ago.
David, who's in Norwich, says, really enjoyed the show, but with 5 national teams in South America recently being fined for homophobic chanting yet again, what are the root causes of this?
A homophobic society, macho societies. Also, I mean, there's a chant when the goalkeeper takes a goal kick that people have nicked from John's lot, from Mexico. There's a homophobic chant that the Mexicans do. And people saw that during the World Cup because so many Mexicans came to Brazil and they latched on to that. It is interesting that action has been taken and, teams have been fined or that they've been unable to use certain stadiums, which doesn't really matter. They just move it to another stadium. But a line is being drawn, and that's never happened before. So there is some progress, at least.
Is there any problems like that with chanting in the United States, John?
Well, some U.S. fans adopt that as well, the Mexican chant. I mean, there's a high number of Mexican-American fans, and it's not just Mexican-Americans that are shouting in American stadiums, but I think there's been a huge backlash against that here. In Mexico, it's seen differently. Unfortunately, I think that it is a complicated word. It's a word that, people who are homosexual have said and gay rights groups have said, this is not okay with us, to me. And thankfully now, as Tim mentions, to FIFA, you have to listen to that. You have to listen to it. Too many Mexican fans see it as FIFA punishing us. FIFA has it out for us. It's everyone's against the Mexican fan. And sometimes you just want to shake them and say, they actually probably don't care that much about you. It's not a conspiracy against Mexico. You're shouting a word that is unacceptable, that groups in your own country, that groups outside your country say, you cannot shout this word. And Mexico has done a big, big campaign to the Federation's credit, because I think they're quite worried that not only the fines are going to stop and they won't be able to play in the Azteca. They moved this most recent qualifier to San Luis Potosí, a city. I took a bus. It was about 6 hours north of Mexico City. It was a brilliant atmosphere, and the fans, before every goal kick, the PA announcer came across the public address and said, hey, everyone, remember, we are supporting Mexico. And I think after the earthquake, there was a lot of, coming together as a nation, coming together. And now instead of the word, fans are being encouraged to shout Mexico at the opposing goalkeeper. And for the most part, it worked. Unfortunately, when Mexico stopped controlling the game, when Trinidad and Tobago had a good moment, fans kind of reverted back. I think the anger kind of comes out. It was frustrating, whatever it was, but it's starting to maybe change in Mexico. But there's a long journey yet, because fans are very set in their ways. And as I mentioned, convinced that it's some sort of conspiracy against them. As Tim mentions, unfortunately, the root is in the society. And I don't think that's going to be plucked out by any sort of fine, stadium being moved, or even a ban on a stadium, no crowd. It's far deeper than that, unfortunately.
John has sent us a tweet. He wants to go back to a conversation we had last week when we were talking about intellectual footballers, academically intellectual footballers. Anybody of that nature in the CONCACAF regions that you can come up with, John? Very clever clogs,
Yeah, there's a lot of players who are, witty or smart. Jordan Morris, who's a young U.S. forward, elected to stay and attend Stanford instead of sign a pro contract right away, which is, Stanford, very prestigious university, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And there's been other, there's sort of a tradition, I would say, in the U.S. of players going to either Ivy League schools or schools like Duke and sort of becoming sticking with football, or sometimes, it doesn't work out after a year or two and they become real estate guys or Wall Street guys or what have you. So that's sort of funny enough. Part of the thing that I think we need to maybe break down about the U.S. soccer culture, it is sort of this intellectual smart sport in some ways. It's sort of the outsider that is for, educated people sometimes. And I think sometimes we get a little too into that. But yeah, there are several examples in the U.S., especially of people who think about the game in an intellectual way and kind of draw on other things.
And talking about California love, we've got Alan in Santa Monica with us. Good morning, Alan.
Yeah, good morning, guys.
Good to speak to you, mate.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
Santa Monica.
I'm a long-term listener, but first-time caller.
Great to have you on finally. And I suppose you haven't had time to call because you've been enjoying Santa Monica. You can't really spend your time thinking about how grey and dull it is back home, can you?
Exactly. Now, I was talking to a colleague today about how I had a sweatshirt on because it was 70 degrees.
Don't even try it, mate.
A little bit cool.
It's not. It's not that kind of a phone-in where you wind us up. Anyway, great to have you with us, Alan. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to sort of share my experience. I've lived in California for 17 years, and over that time, I've slowly evolved into being a U.S. soccer fan. My daughter was born here. She's got blonde hair and straight teeth, unlike the rest of the UK, and she's a California girl. Yeah. But she's grown up to play soccer, and over that time, I've really become a soccer fan. And I just wanted to tell you and share with everybody just how upset I was on Tuesday. I was driving my daughter to a soccer game, and I'm watching it on my phone because it wasn't shown live over here. You had to have a special
cable or something.
Cable or something in order to see it. So I'm watching it bit by bit, and that perfect storm happened. That we lost to Trinidad and Tobago, and then Mexico and Honduras, Mexico and Costa Rica didn't do the U.S. a favor, and so I was so depressed at that point, and it really struck home to me that I really was a U.S. soccer fan, and the thing that upset me most as a UK guy living over here is that I just think it's going to drop the US soccer. The average fan will go back 4 years. It was really getting some momentum here in California. We were getting to get people. They knew where Leicester was 2 years ago. People in Nashville they knew it. Yeah. But now the kids are getting up at 4 a.m. to watch the Premier League. But this just losing the World Cup is just such a setback for the US, and I can just see it and feel it everywhere around me.
But that's football, isn't it? That's football. You're not always going to get your way. You're not always going to qualify. You're not always going to, fulfill the desires of the people. And yet, we love football. We're football fans, and we stay with it, whether England get beaten by Iceland or not.
No, I hear you. Just while I was waiting to come on here, I went down to get a beer from my local store, and it's a Mexican guy there. And whenever I go in there, he's got Mexican League on, and we always talk. And it's a universal language. We can talk about soccer. And even him, as a Mexican, was upset that the US wasn't playing because he's not going to have something to follow on the TV there. He's got the Mexicans there, but he wasn't gloating. I think there's a groundswell of people here in the US who really enjoy soccer, the youngsters, and there's a lot of people playing the game as well. And this is really going to be a setback in terms of getting the average person in the street to know what soccer is, if you like.
And incidentally, Jon Arnold, now that the US haven't qualified, where will the World Cup be shown on American television? Do you know?
Well, it'll still be the same channels, but certainly not the same sort of coverage and excitement. And Fox has the rights, the company, so I think they were going to show a lot of games on Big Fox, we call it, the you don't need a cable subscription for it. But now I bet a lot of the games will probably be tucked away. I think the Mexico coverage will come front and center, which will be fascinating.
Alan, you've heard the discussion tonight, which is a lot of it has been about America not qualifying. There have been all sorts of permutations as to why that didn't happen. What's yours, out of interest? Is the US team, has it been found out in a way? Is it really perhaps not that good. I don't want to say rubbish. I'm not going to say that. But has the national team been found out in a way, do you think?
I mean, yeah, definitely it has been found out. I mean, at the end of the day, the qualification is not so difficult from here. Actually, I don't mean that. It is difficult to do, but the fact that the CONCACAF have those kind of 4 places or 3 plus the playoff does help it. And they really have failed big time by not beating Trinidad and Tobago and going through. In terms of what I see here, I mean, I see a huge grassroots population that play. My daughter plays. She's 15. She plays under 19. I referee. I coach. And here in California, it's the number 1 sport for participation, if you like. And you know, there's a lot of people that play the game, but I just don't see that being converted into quality players, if you like.
And I forgot to tell you, out on bail, fresh out of jail, California dreaming. As soon as I step on the scene, I'm hearing hoochie screaming. I had to do that.
BBC 5 Live.